Ethan Brooks stood in the emergency room, his face so swollen it no longer looked like a face. It was a warped version of the one he knew, a grotesque mask stretched tight across a balloon of flesh. His jaw had doubled in size, maybe tripled, bulging outward with angry red inflammation. The skin was glossy, almost plastic in appearance, and blotched with heat rash patches that pulsed with each beat of his heart. He was 21, but he felt ancient, drained. His reflection in the metallic side of the medical cart beside him barely registered as human. Somewhere beneath that stretched skin and swelling was his real face, his identity, but it was buried now. Or worse, gone. Dr. Alan Reeves entered the room briskly, snapping on a pair of gloves. His voice was calm but firm, practiced from years in trauma medicine. "We need to shave your beard, Ethan, all of it, immediately." Ethan blinked, trying to process the words. "What?" Dr. Reeves didn't pause. He gestured to the nurse, who rolled in a tray with electric clippers. "You have a large, possibly multiloculated abscess under your jaw. The infection is spreading quickly. We can't assess or drain it properly until we get access to the skin underneath." Ethan took a step back, shaking his head. "No, I've been growing this for 2 years. His voice cracked with something that wasn't just fear. It was grief. He looked toward Claire, who had just arrived and stood frozen in the corner. Her eyes darted between Ethan's face and the clippers. Dr. Reeves took a deep breath. "I understand, but right now, this is critical. The swelling suggests the infection may be compromising tissue deeper than the follicles. If we don't act now, you could lose a portion of your jaw, or worse, the infection could reach your bloodstream." Ethan felt his stomach drop, like a cold elevator descending straight into his core. "It was just some beard bumps," he muttered. "Just acne." Dr. Reeves glanced at the nurse, signaling to begin prepping. "When did it start?" Ethan's mind scrambled. The days blurred together. "A week ago. Maybe 10 days? That's all it takes," Dr. Reeves said quietly. "That's all it ever takes." Ethan turned again toward the reflective metal tray, as if one last glance might convince him that everything was still okay. His beard, his thick dark beard that shaped the lower half of his identity, was about to be stripped away. Not for fashion, not by choice, but because something had gone horribly, invisibly wrong underneath it. He wasn't ready. But it didn't matter. The nurse flipped on the clippers. The hum was gentle, but to Ethan it roared like a chainsaw. Claire stepped forward, as if she could somehow pause the moment. But she didn't say anything. She just looked at him, her face tense with worry, her eyes pleading for him to do what he had to do. Ethan nodded once, barely. The nurse brought the clippers to his face. He closed his eyes. The clippers buzzed gently against his cheek as the first path was cut. Ethan felt the vibration down to his bones. A strip of his beard fell away and landed softly on the sheet covering his chest, then another, and another. Within minutes, years of care, pride, and identity lay in dark clumps around him, like something had died. He didn't cry, not in the way a person weeps, but something inside him cracked. A weight settled over his chest, heavier than the infection that swelled his face. It was the realization that this wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a personal unmaking. His beard had been a wall between him and the world, a source of confidence, a symbol of control, and now it was being taken, not trimmed, not styled, but removed, raised, stripped bare. As the last tufts were cleared, the nurse stepped back and gently touched his shoulder. "All done." Her voice was kind, almost apologetic. Ethan opened his eyes and dared to look at the tray again. This time, there was no beard to distract from the damage. The swelling, the discoloration, the angry red abscesses were all visible now. The left side of his jaw looked almost alien, deformed, stretched beyond nature. Several raised pockets throbbed under the skin, one of them nearly the size of a golf ball. Some were shiny with fluid tension, others looked bruised, darker and more ominous. Claire approached slowly. She didn't gasp, she didn't step back. She simply looked, eyes wide, hand covering her mouth. Then softly she said, "You did the right thing." Ethan wasn't sure. Everything felt wrong. His jaw ached, his skin burned, his face was foreign. He wasn't Ethan with the beard anymore. He wasn't anyone he recognized. Dr. Reeves returned, now wearing a more serious expression. "We're prepping you for surgical drainage. You'll be under general anesthesia. You'll wake up with bandages, possibly drains. We're going to do everything we can to save the tissue." "Tissue?" Ethan asked, barely forming the word through the pressure on his jaw. The infection may have compromised the skin and subcutaneous structures. If we don't remove the dead tissue, the bacteria can spread rapidly. Claire reached for Ethan's hand. He let her take it. What happens if you can't save it? Ethan asked. Dr. Reeves paused, then answered with calm clarity. Worst case? We remove enough tissue that the beard may not grow back. Ever. There it was. The truth, not just temporary, not just shaved. The possibility of never seeing his face the way it used to be again. Never feeling that familiar texture under his fingers. Never reclaiming the image he had built and worn like armor. He gave the smallest of nods. Claire squeezed his hand harder. They wheeled him toward the OR soon after, his head strapped lightly to prevent movement, a nurse holding his foreline steady as they moved through sterile corridors. Ethan stared at the lights passing overhead, blinking through the weight on his face, the loss on his mind, and the terror in his chest. It had started as just a few bumps, and now it was surgery. Before there was the hospital room, before the surgical drains and the swelling that stole his face, there was the beard. Ethan Brooks had started growing at the summer after he turned 19. At first it had been patchy, awkward little clusters along his chin and upper lip, barely enough to call facial hair, but he was patient. He kept trimming around the edges, encouraging the fuller parts, learning how to oil, brush, and shape. By 21 he had something real. Thick even, dark with subtle waves that glinted in sunlight. A beard that turned heads. He remembered the first time someone complimented it out loud. He was in a coffee shop, standing in line, when the barista said, "Hey, nice beard, man." Just that, casual. But Ethan carried those words for days. For most of his teenage life, Ethan had been the baby-face kid. In group photos he looked younger than everyone else. He hated it. The beard became more than style. It was his rebellion, his way of showing the world he wasn't a boy anymore. It was a suit of armor, a self-made declaration. I am a man now. His friends noticed the change. His social media followers increased. His dating profile got more right swipes than he ever had before. Every selfie was carefully composed with the beard front and center. His confidence didn't just grow, it surged. And so did the way he presented himself to the world. He started buying beard oils, some scented like sandalwood or cedar, others marketed with names like Lumberjack Blend or Alpha Growth. He didn't just wash his face, he had a routine: warm towel, beard shampoo, conditioner, comb through, oil application, final brush styling. The ritual became meditative, a sacred few minutes each morning where he wasn't just preparing to leave the house, he was shaping his identity. Even his wardrobe changed. Turtlenecks, flannel, denim jackets, all chosen to complement the beard. He liked the image. Ethan Brooks, the guy with the great beard. It made introductions easier. You know Ethan? Tall guy, good beard? That's how people described him. And he loved it. Claire had met him when the beard was already fully formed. She once told him jokingly that if he ever shaved it off she'd have no idea who he was. He laughed, but secretly he took it to heart. He liked how she'd run her fingers through it absent-mindedly while they watched movies, how she'd tug gently on the ends when teasing him. The beard wasn't just a part of him, it was a part of them. So when the first small bumps appeared, hidden beneath the dense curls along his jawline, Ethan didn't panic. He was used to little annoyances. Ingrown hairs happened. It was just part of the beard game. He'd read dozens of posts online about guys dealing with them. Still, he noticed the tenderness. Small, hard lumps, no bigger than peas, maybe 3 or 4 of them. When he pressed on one with his fingers, it felt deep, sensitive. He stood in front of the mirror, tugging his beard apart to see the skin beneath. But it was difficult. The hair was thick, and the bumps weren't visible unless you pressed the hair aside just right. He didn't think much of it. That day he simply added a few extra drops of beard oil, something high-end he'd picked up last month, and hoped it would soothe whatever irritation was happening under there. It didn't. The next morning, the bumps were still there. And now there were more. He counted at least 7, scattered unevenly across his jawline and chin. Some had doubled in size overnight. A few felt warm to the touch. Ethan frowned at his reflection. His beard still looked perfect from the outside, thick and uniform, but he could feel the war brewing underneath. Claire noticed him wincing at dinner that night when he bit into a sandwich. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said, rubbing the side of his jaw casually. "Just some beard acne, getting some bumps under here." Claire set her fork down. "Maybe you should shave. Just for a little while. Let your skin breathe." Ethan looked at her like she'd just suggested he peel off his eyebrows. Shave it? Are you serious? I mean, just until the bumps go away. Maybe it's clogged or something. I've been growing this for 2 years, Claire. 2 years. I'm not shaving it for some ingrown hairs. She didn't push it. Claire knew how much the beard meant to him. Knew it wasn't just hair. Knew that suggesting he shave was, to Ethan, like asking him to be someone else. The next day, the pain had shifted. It wasn't just pressure anymore. It was a dull, pulsing ache that wrapped around the entire left side of Ethan's jaw. When he chewed, it hurt. When he spoke, it hurt. Even when he wasn't doing anything at all, there was a constant throb, like a slow drumbeat under his skin. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, using both hands to part the thick curtain of hair that concealed his jawline. It wasn't easy. The beard had grown dense, and any attempt to comb through it now tugged at the inflamed areas beneath. But he managed to catch a glimpse of what was happening under the surface. What he saw didn't look like acne anymore. The bumps were redder now, angrier. Some had white centers, pus-filled domes that looked like they were ready to erupt. Others had merged into larger, discolored patches that felt hot under his fingertips. Ethan winced as he examined them, then pulled his hand back and stared at it like it had betrayed him. He turned to his phone, opened Google, and searched again. Beard bumps painful won't go away. This time, he scrolled past the blog posts and beard care forums and clicked on a medical site. Folliculitis. Inflammation of the hair follicles. Common in men with thick beards. Can be bacterial. Can become an abscess if untreated. Ethan didn't want it to be bacterial. That sounded like something people went to the hospital for. He wasn't that guy. He wasn't going to show up at urgent care and tell them he had some bumps under his beard. It would be embarrassing. Worse, they might shave him. Instead, he read the at-home treatments and followed them to the letter. He washed his beard twice a day with antibacterial soap. He used warm compresses 3 times daily. He applied diluted tea tree oil with cotton pads. He stopped using scented beard products. He even took some leftover antibiotics Claire had from a previous sinus infection, reasoning that a few pills couldn't hurt. But it wasn't working. By day 5, the swelling had become noticeable, not enough that strangers would see it, but enough that people who knew him could tell something was off. His face looked subtly asymmetric. His smile felt tighter, and the throbbing was no longer dull. It had sharpened into a stabbing pain whenever he moved his jaw. Claire came over that evening and took one look at him before setting down her bag. "Ethan, your face, I know," he muttered. "It's just inflamed. It'll pass." "Babe, it's not just inflammation. You're swollen. You need to see a doctor." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not paying hundreds of dollars for someone to tell me it's an infection and give me antibiotics I already have. Then go to urgent care tomorrow morning. First thing." "I will," he lied. That night, he barely slept. Every shift of his head on the pillow sent a jolt through his jaw. He woke up in the early hours of the morning and stood in front of the mirror again. The left side of his face had ballooned slightly more, the jawline rounded out like someone had tucked a ball beneath the skin. He pressed his fingers gently along the ridge and felt something give slightly beneath the surface, like pressing on a water balloon. Something inside him said, "This is bad." But another part of him, the part that had nurtured that beard, protected it, loved it, said, "It's going to get better. Just give it one more day." Claire texted the next morning. "Did you go?" Ethan replied. "Not yet. Later today." But he didn't. Instead, he took another hot compress to his jaw, popped a few Advil, drank a smoothie for breakfast because chewing hurt too much, told himself he'd go tomorrow. When Claire came over that night and saw how much worse the swelling had gotten, she didn't hide her alarm. "Ethan, this isn't normal anymore. It's just infected follicles," he insisted. "I've read about it. It just needs to drain." She paused, then said something she never had before. "Let me help you. Maybe we can drain it at home." That gave him pause. He'd always known popping things like that was risky, but the pain was so intense now, so ever-present, that the thought of relief, even temporary, was tempting. He looked in the mirror once more and saw the face he thought he knew, buried under pain and pride. The beard still looked good, still strong, still his, but underneath, something was festering, something that didn't care how long he had grown it or how much it meant. And still, he hesitated. Because shaving it felt like losing himself. By the 6th day, Ethan knew something was seriously wrong. The pain had evolved. It wasn't confined to the jawline anymore. It radiated up toward his ear and down into his neck. A constant, sharp throbbing that didn't respond to painkillers the way it had before. Ibuprofen dulled it slightly, but never for long. And the swelling, God, the swelling, had crept forward into his cheek and downward toward his throat, making the entire lower left quadrant of his face look distorted, bloated, and unnatural. His jaw had started to feel heavy, as if he were carrying something inside it. The pressure wasn't just internal now, it was visible. The left side of his face looked fuller, rounder, unbalanced. When he opened his mouth to brush his teeth, he could only manage half an inch before a searing pain shot through the joint. Chewing was out of the question. Even soft foods felt like grinding glass. He stood in the bathroom, shirtless, staring at himself in the mirror, running his fingers gently along his jaw. The beard still covered most of the swelling, giving the illusion of volume and fullness. But underneath, he could feel the distortion. The lumps were no longer isolated. They had merged, creating larger masses, hot to the touch and pulsing with each heartbeat. For the first time, Ethan felt fear, real fear. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, trying to illuminate the skin beneath his beard. When he angled the light just right and parted the hair with both hands, he could see it. Redness, blotches of inflamed skin, and the outlines of raised abscesses just beneath the surface. One in particular looked sinister, its center bulging outward with a yellowish hue. His stomach churned. This wasn't acne, this wasn't irritation. This was an infection, plain and simple. And it was getting worse. He walked back to his bedroom, pacing slowly, thinking. Claire had called him twice that morning already, but he hadn't answered. He didn't want to hear her say it again. You need to go to the doctor. He knew, but something in him still resisted. The beard was still intact, still masking the damage, still his shield. If he went in, they'd want to see underneath. They'd probably want to shave it. And the thought of that still twisted his gut into knots. A few minutes later, his roommate Jake walked into the apartment, kicking off his shoes and tossing his keys into the bowl near the door. Jake stopped in his tracks when he saw Ethan in the kitchen. Dude, Jake said, blinking, what the hell happened to your face? Ethan turned slightly away. It's just some kind of follicle infection or something. That doesn't look like just anything. You're all swollen on one side. You look like you've got a softball in your jaw. Ethan opened the fridge and pulled out a bottle of water, avoiding eye contact. It's fine. I'm treating it. Jake frowned. Have you seen a doctor? No, bro. I said I'm treating it. With what? Essential oils? Ethan didn't answer. He twisted the cap off the bottle and took a small sip, wincing as the cool liquid hit the back of his throat. Even that hurt now. Jake leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I don't want to tell you what to do, man, but that looks infected as hell. That's not normal. I had a staph infection once and it didn't even get that bad. You should seriously consider getting it looked at. Ethan set the bottle down and rubbed his temples. His jaw throbbed in response. It's not that simple, he said quietly. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's not? If I go in, they're going to shave it. All of it. Jake blinked, then tilted his head. Your beard? Yeah. Ethan, it's just hair. It'll grow back. Ethan's voice was tight. It's not just hair. It's part of how I don't know. How I function. It's who I am. Jake didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, then said, I get it. But you can't put a beard above your health, man. That's crazy. Ethan looked down at the floor. I know. Jake sighed and headed to his room, leaving Ethan alone in the kitchen with his reflection in the dark microwave glass. He caught his own distorted silhouette. Bearded, yes, but twisted, unbalanced, almost like a caricature of himself. Later that night, the pain intensified. He woke up at 2:14 a.m. in a cold sweat, the left side of his face radiating heat. He reached for the thermometer on his nightstand and stuck it under his tongue. When the beep sounded, it read 100.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Low-grade fever. His body was beginning to fight back. But it wasn't winning. Claire texted him at 7:30 a.m. Can I come over later? I want to see you. He hesitated, then typed, sure. He didn't want her to see him like this, but some part of him knew. He needed someone else to witness what was happening, because at this point, it wasn't just about pain or pride anymore. It was about how far he'd let it go. Claire arrived just after 8 that evening, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, her coat half-zipped, and a bag of soup containers clutched in her arms. When Ethan opened the door, He saw her eyes widen for a moment, not with surprise, but with something else. Alarm, concern, maybe even guilt, as if she hadn't realized until now just how bad it had gotten. She stepped inside slowly. "Ethan." He didn't respond. He turned his head slightly so she could see the full extent of the swelling. It was worse now, much worse. The entire left side of his face had ballooned. His beard, once thick and luxurious, now looked like it was draped awkwardly over a mass that didn't belong. The shape of his jaw was gone. It had been replaced by a rounded, sagging bulge that dragged the corner of his mouth downward. Claire set the soup on the table and walked over to him. "Your skin is red and shiny. It looks like it's stretched. It feels like it's going to split open," Ethan muttered. She reached out carefully, fingertips hovering just above the skin, not quite touching. "Have you been able to eat anything today?" He shook his head. "I can't open my mouth more than an inch. And you still haven't seen a doctor?" "I will tomorrow," he said, for the 4th day in a row. Claire exhaled, a mixture of frustration and fear. "What are you waiting for?" He sat down at the edge of the couch, his hands resting on his knees. "For it to go away. It's not going away." "I know." They sat in silence for a moment, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Claire knelt in front of him, eyes locked on his distorted face. "Let me try something." He looked at her warily. "What?" "If we can drain it, just a little, you might feel better. Maybe it'll take some of the pressure off." Ethan hesitated. "Claire, I'll be careful. I'll sterilize everything. We won't go deep. Just one of the bumps. The big one on your jaw." He knew it was a bad idea. Every medical article he had skimmed warned against draining infections at home. But at that point, pain had chipped away at logic. It was unbearable, constant, and dehumanizing. His face didn't feel like his anymore. The idea of a little relief, even temporary, even risky, sounded like salvation. "Okay," he said quietly. "Just one." They moved to the bathroom, where Claire laid out a clean towel, alcohol wipes, gloves, a fresh needle from a sealed first aid kit, and tissues. She tied her hair back tighter, washed her hands twice, then slipped on the gloves. Ethan leaned over the sink, bracing himself. The light above the mirror was harsh and clinical. Claire gently parted his beard, searching for the most prominent bump, the one bulging out near the corner of his jaw. "This one," she said softly. "It's the worst." He nodded. She cleaned the area with alcohol, waited for it to dry, then carefully pierced the center of the abscess with the tip of the needle. There was a second of pressure, and then a burst. Thick, yellowish-white pus erupted from the site, splattering onto the tissue she had ready. Claire gasped but didn't stop. She gently pressed around the bump, and more fluid came, oozing in slow, disgusting waves. She filled one tissue, then another, then a third. "Oh my God," she whispered. "There's so much." Ethan didn't answer. The pain had dulled for a brief moment, replaced by a sick kind of relief. The pressure had decreased. The skin felt looser. For the first time in days, he didn't feel like he was going to explode. But within an hour, the swelling returned. Faster. Worse. The area around the drained abscess was now redder, angrier. A throbbing pulse had developed deep beneath the surface. Ethan began to sweat again. His temperature climbed. He could feel it, heat building behind his eyes, a pressure in his skull, a tightness in his neck. Claire touched his forehead. "You're burning up." He reached for the thermometer. 101.5 degrees Fahrenheit. She stared at the number, then back at him. "You need to go. Now. It's late." Urgent cares closed. Then the ER. For a swollen face? For a rapidly worsening infection. "Ethan, your body is fighting something serious and it's not winning. If this spreads, if it's already in your bloodstream, this isn't about a beard anymore. It's about your life." He wanted to argue, wanted to cling to the comfort of another delay, one more night, one more round of compresses, but he knew. He looked at her, eyes heavy, jaw pulsing. "Okay." Claire grabbed her keys. They were at the hospital within 25 minutes. By then the fever had climbed to 102.3 degrees Fahrenheit, and Ethan was shivering despite the sweat pooling along his back. The triage nurse took one look at his face and called for immediate attention. As they wheeled him through the double doors toward an exam room, he caught a final glimpse of himself in a reflective panel. His beard, once his pride, now draped over an infection so severe it had changed the shape of his face. It had started with a few bumps. Now he could barely recognize himself. The exam room smelled like antiseptic and stale air. Ethan sat on the padded table, hands gripping the edge, legs dangling slightly as the chill of the hospital air seeped into his skin. Claire sat beside him, silent, clutching her phone like it could protect her from whatever was about to happen. Her eyes hadn't left his face in minutes. Dr. Alan Reeves entered with a clipboard and a no-nonsense stride. He looked to be in his early 50s, gray at the temples, deep creases beside his eyes, and a gaze that cut through excuses. He introduced himself briefly, snapped on a pair of gloves, and stepped forward to examine Ethan's jaw. Even before touching it, his expression shifted. "How long have you had this swelling?" he asked. Ethan tried to answer without moving his jaw too much. "About a week. Started small. Did you apply any treatments? Antibiotics? Warm compresses?" Ethan nodded. "Tea tree oil. Antibacterial soap. Tried to drain one?" "Doctor." Reeves froze mid-palpation. "You tried to drain it?" "Yeah. Last night. My girlfriend helped." The doctor closed his eyes for half a second. When he opened them, there was a quiet urgency in his voice. "That was a mistake." Claire's face turned red. "We sterilized everything. We used gloves and alcohol." "I'm sure you did," Dr. Reeves said gently, "but once an infection reaches this depth, any pressure applied can push bacteria further into surrounding tissue, and if the skin is breached, it opens the door for the infection to enter the bloodstream." Ethan swallowed hard, or tried to. "Even that hurt now." Dr. Reeves stepped back and motioned to a nurse outside the door. "We need blood work, 4 fluids, and a CT scan of the jaw and neck." "Stat." He turned back to Ethan. "The swelling is significant, and based on your fever, there's a strong possibility the infection has already begun spreading systemically. We need to confirm how deep this has gone, and whether there are multiple abscesses." "Will I need antibiotics?" Ethan asked, already knowing the answer. "You'll need more than that," Dr. Reeves said. "We're most likely dealing with a multiloculated abscess, meaning several pockets of infection that have merged together. These won't respond well to oral antibiotics alone. You'll need surgical drainage, probably under general anesthesia." Claire reached for Ethan's hand, and he let her take it. Her grip was cold but firm. "There's one more thing," Dr. Reeves added. "Before we can proceed, we'll need to shave your beard." Completely. Silence. Ethan stared straight ahead, eyes locked on the blank beige wall. The words hit harder than he expected. He knew it was coming, knew it was inevitable, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "No other way?" he asked. Dr. Reeves shook his head. "We need full access to the skin to assess the extent of the infection, identify drainage points, and ensure a sterile field for the procedure. We can't treat what we can't see." Claire glanced at him, waiting for his reaction, but Ethan didn't speak. He just sat there, numb, stunned, as if someone had told him he was about to lose a limb. The beard wasn't just hair. It was years. Years of patience, pride, ritual, and identity. It was how he framed his face, how he saw himself, how others saw him. Without it, he felt exposed, small, like all the confidence he had built would go with it. But he also knew the alternative. He'd seen the look on the doctor's face. This wasn't about saving the beard anymore. It was about saving his jaw. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, barely more than a whisper. "Do what you have to do." The nurse returned within minutes carrying a tray and a pair of electric clippers. She spoke gently, with a kind of practiced empathy. "We'll be careful. I know this probably isn't easy." Ethan didn't answer. He just leaned back slightly as she approached, the buzzing sound filling the small room. The moment the clippers touched his skin, a wave of nausea rose in his chest. Not from pain, but from something deeper, loss. Each pass stripped away more than just hair. It stripped away routine, identity, familiarity. He stared straight ahead, refusing to look in the mirror mounted on the opposite wall. He didn't want to watch. Didn't want to see himself disappear, piece by piece. Claire sat nearby, silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't try to stop the nurse, didn't try to say anything comforting. She understood this was a moment Ethan had to move through himself, alone. The buzzing continued. Every few seconds, a soft clump of dark beard landed in the stainless steel tray beside the bed. Years of growth reduced to piles of lifeless strands. When the final pass was made and the machine clicked off, the silence that followed was deafening. The nurse stepped back and placed a warm compress over the freshly exposed skin. "You did great," she said softly. even though he hadn't done anything but sit still and die a little inside. Ethan slowly turned his head and caught his reflection in the mirror. His breath caught. The lower half of his face was no longer his. The infection, now fully visible, looked worse than he had imagined. His jaw was grotesquely distorted. The skin was stretched and red, shiny with inflammation, and dotted with raised, fluid-filled lumps. Some were the size of grapes, one nearly the size of a golf ball. All of them were clustered together, creating a grotesque landscape that blurred the lines of his once sharp features. Even Claire, who had seen it up close before, inhaled sharply at the sight. Dr. Reeves returned and examined the now exposed area. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't need to. His face told the whole story. "This is worse than I thought," he said, tracing a gloved finger gently along the border of one of the larger abscesses. "We'll need to call in a surgical consult." He turned toward the nurse, page Dr. Rowe, head and neck. "Let her know it's urgent." Claire stood and came to Ethan's side, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. He leaned into her touch for just a second, then pulled back. Not because he didn't want it, but because he didn't feel worthy of comfort. Not right now. Not after letting it get this far. "I should have gone in sooner," he said quietly. Claire didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Regret was already doing the talking. 15 minutes later, Dr. Elizabeth Rowe arrived. She was in her mid-40s, sharp-featured, confident without being cold. She greeted Ethan with calm professionalism, reviewed the scans, and began her own physical assessment. "The infection has created multiple abscess pockets," she explained. "We call this a multiloculated abscess, meaning it's not just one big infection, but several interconnected pockets, all beneath the skin." "Can you drain them?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Dr. Rowe said, "but we'll need to take you to the OR. The depth and complexity make bedside drainage too risky and incomplete. You'll be under general anesthesia. The procedure shouldn't take more than an hour or two, but recovery could take days, possibly more depending on what we find." Ethan swallowed hard. "And the tissue, will it heal?" Dr. Rowe didn't sugarcoat it. "Some of the surrounding tissue may be necrotic. That means we'll need to remove it. There's a possibility some of your hair follicles won't survive." Claire closed her eyes. Ethan just nodded. By the time they began prepping him for surgery, Ethan had stopped trying to hold on to what was lost. The beard was gone. The pain was getting worse. The mirror had shown him the truth. He was already someone else. Now the only thing left to do was make sure that person survived. The operating room was colder than Ethan expected. Sterile, bright, the kind of bright that made everything look too real, too sharp. He lay on the surgical bed as a nurse adjusted the foreline in his arm, another one placing small adhesive monitors across his chest. Machines beeped softly in the background, and the scent of antiseptic filled his lungs. Claire wasn't allowed past the double doors, but her voice echoed in his mind. "You're going to be okay. Just let them fix it." Dr. Elizabeth Rowe stood at the head of the room, reviewing his CT scans one last time on a nearby screen. Her voice was low even as she discussed the plan with the surgical team. "Abscesses extend from the submandibular region to the anterior portion of the platysma. Multiple fluid pockets will incise along the lower mandibular border and extend medially if needed. Expect necrotic tissue. Expect undermining." Ethan didn't understand most of the terms, but he understood the tone. Serious, controlled, efficient. A masked anesthesiologist leaned over him, eyes crinkling with what might have been a smile. "We're going to put you under in just a moment. You'll start to feel a little lightheaded. That's normal." Ethan nodded slightly, the weight of his swollen jaw pulling more than gravity should allow. The last thing he saw before slipping into unconsciousness was the overhead light turning from white to a soft blur, like a sun slipping behind clouds. He didn't wake up all at once. At first, there were sounds, low voices, beeping monitors, the metallic clatter of tools being cleared from a tray. Then came sensation, the tight pull of gauze, the sting of raw skin, a dull throbbing that pulsed through his lower face like distant thunder. His eyes fluttered open to the fluorescent blur of a recovery room ceiling. He was breathing through his nose, mouth dry and slightly open, though every movement sent lightning through his jaw. Claire's face came into view beside the bed, pale and tight with concern. "Hey," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're awake." Ethan blinked slowly. "You did great," she continued, brushing a hand along his forearm. "You're okay." He tried to speak, but his lips barely moved. Pain flared through his chin, so he stopped. The only sound he could manage was a low grunt of acknowledgement. A nurse approached, adjusting the foreline. "Don't try to talk just yet," she said kindly. "You've got a couple of drains in place and a lot of swelling. We'll give you something for the pain." Ethan wanted to ask how bad it was, wanted to know what they'd found, but he couldn't form the words. Later, when Dr. Rowe returned, she spoke with the weight of someone who had seen a battlefield. "The infection was more extensive than we initially thought," she explained, addressing both Ethan and Claire. "We drained over 200 milliliters of pus from multiple interconnected abscesses. Some of the tissue along your jawline was necrotic, dead. We had to remove that to stop the spread. Unfortunately, some of that tissue included parts of the dermis that housed your hair follicles." Claire's hand tightened around Ethan's. "Dr. Rowe continued, "We flushed the entire area thoroughly and left the incisions partially open with drains to continue drawing out residual fluid. You'll be on 4 antibiotics for at least 3 days, maybe longer depending on how your body responds. After that, we'll reassess for wound closure. Scarring is likely, and beard regrowth in the affected areas is uncertain." Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable beneath the bandages and swelling. She saw the question in his eyes and answered it before he could ask. "I can't promise your beard will grow back. Some of those follicles were destroyed. I'm sorry." He looked away, blinking hard, but not from pain, not the physical kind. The next few days blurred together in a haze of medication, sterile sheets, and hourly check-ins. Nurses came and went. Antibiotics dripped slowly through tubes into his veins, the drains on either side of his jaw filled with thin red fluid and sludgy remnants of infection. Every time they emptied, the smell reminded him of what had been inside him. Claire visited constantly, bringing clean clothes, soft music, and the kind of presence that made the sterile room feel less like a cage. She didn't flinch when the bandages were changed. She didn't shy away when the doctor showed her the drainage tubes or talked about wound care. She simply stayed. On the 4th day, Dr. Rowe informed them that a second minor surgery would be required. "There's still a pocket of residual infection that didn't drain fully," she explained. "It's small, but if we don't address it now, it could reignite the whole process." Ethan closed his eyes. He was tired of pain, tired of being sliced open, tired of fighting a war under his own skin. But he nodded. The second surgery was less invasive, but the recovery dragged. The new incision was small, tucked beneath the jawline, but even that needed daily cleaning and drain maintenance. On the 7th day, Dr. Rowe finally removed the drains. The moment the last tube slipped free from his skin, Ethan felt like he could breathe again. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his hospital room and looked at himself. Really looked. The swelling was still present but reduced. The left side of his face drooped slightly, skin pink and raw in places, marked by healing incisions and bruising that would take weeks to fade. The absence of the beard made everything more visible, every flaw, every scar, every reminder of what had happened. He touched his chin gently, feeling the smoothness where his beard used to be. The familiar coarseness was gone. In its place was skin that felt foreign, tight, sensitive, and unrecognizable. Claire appeared behind him in the mirror. She wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "You're still you," she whispered. But Ethan wasn't sure. The day Ethan was discharged, the nurse handed him a mirror, along with a small kit for wound care. He hadn't asked for the mirror, but she insisted. "You'll need to check for signs of reinfection. It's important you get used to seeing what's there now." He took it in silence and waited until he was alone in the bathroom before raising it to his face. What he saw wasn't just a changed face, it was a battlefield. The surgical sites were red and swollen, with lines of steri strips running across 2 incisions, one along the curve of his left jaw and another just below his chin. The skin around them was bruised yellow and purple, mottled like overripe fruit. Where his beard had once been thickest, patches of skin were now completely bare, shiny, smooth, and slightly pink from the trauma. In other places, small scabs clung to healing follicles. There were parts of his jawline where hair might grow back, but there were other spots where it clearly never would. He turned his head slowly, examining himself from every angle. The face looking back at him didn't feel like his. It wasn't just the physical damage, it was the grief. The mourning of something lost not in an accident, but in a slow, stubborn descent of denial. Later that night, at home, he stood in front of the full-length mirror in his bedroom, shirtless, towel around his neck. Claire had gone to pick up dinner. The house was quiet. For the first time since the ordeal began, there were no machines beeping, No nurses checking his chart, no doctor discussing what tissue had died. Just him. He raised one hand to his chin and let his fingers brush the bare skin there. The sensation was so strange, too smooth, too foreign, no friction, no texture. He pressed a little harder, feeling along the ridge where his jaw used to be sharper, more defined, now slightly altered by swelling and scar tissue. This was his new face. He hadn't taken any selfies. Every photo on his phone from the past year featured the beard he had proudly groomed, shaped, and used as a kind of emotional armor. That beard had been his signature. It had made him feel more confident, more masculine. It had hidden his insecurities. And now it was gone. And what lay beneath wasn't just a jawline but vulnerability itself. He opened his dating app and scrolled through his profile. Every picture showed him smiling, beard full and thick, head slightly tilted in that effortless, curated way. These weren't just old photos, they were now lies, misrepresentations. He stared at the edit profile button but didn't press it. Instead, he deleted the app. Claire returned later with takeout and a stack of gauze. She'd become surprisingly comfortable with post-op care, learning from the nurses, asking questions, writing everything down in her notes app. Ethan appreciated it, but part of him hated needing the help, hated seeing her wince, no matter how subtle, when she changed his dressing or cleaned the edges of an incision. But she never looked away, never flinched, and that meant more than anything. "Want to watch something?" she asked after dinner. "Sure," he replied, settling on the couch. His voice was softer now, quieter, like it didn't want to call attention to itself. They watched an old comedy, something easy. But halfway through, Ethan caught his reflection in the black screen between scenes and found himself staring again. Not with horror this time, but with fatigue. "You okay?" Claire asked gently, noticing the shift in his posture. He nodded. "Yeah, just adjusting. It's going to take time," she said. "I know." A beat passed. Then he added, "I keep thinking how stupid it was. Not going in sooner. Letting it get that far." Claire was quiet for a moment before she said, "You didn't want to lose something that mattered to you. I get that. It wasn't stupid, it was human." Ethan didn't answer, but the words sank in deeper than he expected. Over the next several weeks he healed slowly. The swelling went down, the pain faded, the stitches were removed, and the scars began to settle into his skin like reluctant guests refusing to leave. He tried growing his beard back. At first there was hope. Tiny hairs began to emerge along parts of his jaw, but in other places, especially where the infection had been worst, there was nothing. Just smooth skin, pale and flat. He waited, and waited. Used every product he could find. Beard oils, growth serums, biotin, gentle massage. Patience. But it became clear after 2 months, the follicles were dead. The scars were permanent. His beard would never come back the way it had been. Eventually, he shaved off the patchy growth and accepted what the mirror had already been telling him. The old version of Ethan Brooks was gone, and yet, he wasn't entirely lost. One night, after a particularly difficult day filled with awkward glances from coworkers and a woman on a date who asked, "So, where's the beard from your profile?" Ethan found himself back at his desk, opening his laptop. He started typing. Not a journal entry, not a rant, a story. He wrote about the first bump, about the denial, about the heat and swelling, the fear of losing what had become so much more than facial hair, about the mistake of waiting too long, about what the doctors found under the skin, what the infection took, and what the mirror revealed. When he finished, he posted it anonymously on a men's health forum. The responses poured in, men thanking him, sharing their own stories, asking questions. Some posted photos of their own beard bumps, asking, "Does this look serious? Should I see a doctor?" Ethan replied to every one. Later, he was invited to speak at a local barbershop's wellness night, then a podcast, then a grooming convention. His story traveled, not because it was rare, but because it was familiar and necessary. He stood in front of rooms filled with men who prided themselves on image, and he showed them the pictures. Before, during, after. He told them what the doctor had told him. You can shave your beard and grow it back, but you can't grow back dead tissue. At the end of each talk, he would run a hand along the faint scar that curved beneath his chin. This scar, he'd say, is from waiting too long, and this one, he'd add, pointing to the mirrorless space he now carried inside, is from thinking my beard was more important than my health. And somehow, in losing that part of himself, Ethan had found something else entirely, something better. 6 weeks after surgery, Ethan stood in front of the mirror again, this time at home, freshly showered, towel around his neck, electric razor in hand. There was a silence in the room that felt loaded, like even the walls were waiting to see what he would do. His beard had started to return, or at least parts of it had. On the right side of his face, the hair had come in strong, thick, familiar. Along the mustache and upper lip, the texture was unchanged. His neck stubble, too, had grown in just as it always had. But the left side, the left was a different story. Patchy, barren in places, scarred. A large section along the lower jaw remained smooth, the skin pinkish and slightly raised, marked by surgical lines and irregular pigment. Around it, a few clusters of hair grew in unevenly, thin, wiry, and clearly struggling. The contrast between the two sides of his face was jarring, like a before and after photo had been split down the middle and glued together. He ran his fingers over the uneven growth, not to feel the hair, but to feel its absence, the hollowness of it, the emptiness where something used to be. For weeks, he'd clung to the hope that it was too early to tell, that maybe the follicles were just stunned. Maybe healing took longer for some people. He'd read forums, watched YouTube videos about beard transplants, dermarollers, topical solutions. He'd bought the creams, the oils, the vitamins. Every morning he inspected his face under bright light like a detective, looking for signs of new growth, signs of life. There were none, bar. Infection had claimed those follicles for good. The tissue was too damaged, the roots too far gone, and now the dream was over. He clicked the electric razor on. The buzz filled the bathroom like an old friend he hadn't seen in years. Carefully, he moved the blade across the right side of his face first, shaving down the dense growth to match the left. Each stroke felt like a quiet surrender, not of pride, but of illusion. The final pass revealed his whole face again, completely bare, completely exposed. The man in the mirror looked older and younger at the same time. The scars along his jaw were still healing, pale lines that cut across where hair once grew. His chin looked thinner without the beard's depth, his mouth more visible, his cheeks more angular. He didn't look bad, just different, unfamiliar. He turned his head side to side, observing the angles, the shape of his face without the distraction of the beard. It wasn't ugly, but it wasn't him, not the him he'd known, curated, and shown to the world. That version of Ethan Brooks had been buried beneath those hospital sheets, along with every clump of beard hair swept into the surgical tray. And this was what remained. The next morning, he opened his camera app and took a photo. Natural light. No filters, no beard, no angle tricks. Just him, face forward, scars visible, expression neutral. Then he opened his dating profile and deleted every old photo. He uploaded the new one, filled out the updated bio, and added a sentence at the end he never would have written 6 months ago. Former beard guy. Surgery changed the face, not the heart. The matches were fewer now, slower. Some women still swiped right, others didn't. Some ghosted after the first photo exchange. A few asked outright, "What happened to your face?" And one, just one, said, "I like that you didn't hide it." He went on a few dates, most of them awkward, not because of how he looked, but because of how he felt. He still carried the weight of the change, the memory of the infection, the shame of waiting too long. He'd smile, but not with the same ease. He'd talk, but with a slight hesitation, waiting to see if someone would ask about the scars. Some did, most didn't. But he always noticed the pause, the glance, the double take. Back home, his friends tried to adjust. "Dude, you look totally different. I almost didn't recognize you. You ever gonna grow it back?" To each, Ethan would give a slight shrug and say, "Can't." Then he'd touch his jaw absent-mindedly, fingers tracing the line where skin had healed but hair would never return. Claire stayed around for a while. Longer than he expected, actually. She never made him feel less, never made him feel like a broken version of who he'd been. But over time, they began to drift. Not out of anger or resentment, just change. A quiet, mutual realization that something had shifted between them. Something had ended, even if neither of them wanted to say it out loud. One night, over tea, she finally said, "I think we were holding on to who you were, not who you are now." Ethan nodded. He knew she was right. He thanked her. They hugged for a long time. And that was it. He didn't cry. He didn't feel shattered. Just a little emptier, but even emptiness, he realized, could be a starting point, a place to rebuild. It was around the 3-month mark when Ethan stopped flinching at his reflection. He wouldn't have called it acceptance, not yet. But the sting was gone. The daily instinct to avoid mirrors, to pull up his shirt collar, to find the right angle in photos, it started to fade. What replaced it wasn't confidence. It was something quieter, a kind of detachment. This was his face now, and whether or not he loved it didn't change the fact that it was his. He still missed the beard. That never really changed. He'd catch glimpses of old photos, him laughing at a beach bonfire, posing at a friend's wedding, sipping coffee in a cafe, and feel a pang, like remembering a version of himself that had died young. But the pain was dull now, like a scar that had hardened and stopped itching. One evening, scrolling through an online grooming forum, he came across a post from someone describing almost the exact same symptoms he had once dismissed. "I've had this lump under my beard for 3 days. Hurts when I touch it. Anyone else deal with this?" Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he typed a reply, "Don't wait." "I waited. I thought it was just beard acne. I ended up in surgery, lost half my beard permanently. Go see a doctor." He didn't expect much, but the poster responded within an hour. "Damn. For real? That bad?" Ethan answered with a picture. Not the worst one, but one from right after surgery. Swollen, drained, bandaged, face stripped bare. "It can get worse. Trust me." That single reply turned into a thread. Dozens of men chimed in, some sharing their own photos, some asking questions, some quietly admitting they'd been too embarrassed to go in. One even wrote, "I needed to see this. Booking an appointment tomorrow." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a strange mix of vindication and purpose. It wasn't just a bad story anymore. It was a warning, a tool, maybe even a small act of service. Over the next few weeks, he found himself writing more, not just forum replies, but longer posts, Medium articles, one titled, "What I Lost When I Waited, a Beard Story." Another, "From Identity to Emergency Room, How Pride Almost Cost Me My Face." He didn't hide behind anonymity. He posted under his real name, attached real photos, told the full story, not to shock but to teach. The responses kept coming. Men sent him DMs with questions. Women sent him thank you notes for convincing their partners to see doctors. A dermatologist in Seattle reached out, asking permission to use one of his posts in a patient education pamphlet. A grooming podcast invited him on as a guest. A men's wellness startup asked him to do a video interview. Ethan didn't say yes to everything. But when something felt right, he leaned into it. The first time he stood in front of an actual audience, at a small health-focused event at a barbershop downtown, he was nervous. The room was filled with bearded men, some long braided Viking beards, some neatly edged corporate beards, some messy, just getting started beards. Ethan stood before them, clean-shaven, jawline slightly uneven, a faint scar peeking out beneath the collar of his shirt. He began with a simple sentence, "3 months ago, I was you." He told them the story, the bumps, the excuses, the delay, the needle, the ER, the surgery. He showed them photos. He showed them the mirror he carried during recovery. He showed them the razors he used to shave down the last bits of hope when his beard didn't grow back. He ended with, "You don't have to lose your beard to learn this lesson. You just have to stop thinking that pain is a test of your toughness. It's not. It's a message. Answer it early." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, thoughtful, the kind that came from people who'd been hit in the gut. After the talk, several guys came up to him. One had tears in his eyes. Another asked to shake his hand. A younger man in his 20s pulled him aside and whispered, "You might have just saved my face." Ethan didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded and said, "That's why I told it." The more he spoke, the more he healed. Not physically, his body had mostly done that, but emotionally, spiritually. Telling the story gave shape to the trauma. It made it useful, purposeful. His scars were still there, they always would be. Some days they caught the light in a way that made him wince. Other days he forgot they were even visible. But they no longer defined him. One night, nearly a year after the surgery, he sat down at his desk and looked at a photo he kept tucked in a drawer. It was a selfie from before the infection. He was sitting in his car, beard full, sunglasses on, smiling like someone who had never been afraid of anything. He looked at it for a long time. Then he smiled, Not sadly, not longingly, but softly. "I liked you," he said aloud to the photo. "But I like who I became, too." Then he slid the photo back into the drawer and closed it. It was a Friday morning in early spring when Ethan stepped up to the small stage at a community wellness fair. The event was hosted by a local barbershop collective and sponsored by a few health clinics. Most of the men in the audience wore beards, some neat, some wild, some still in their fledgling stages. They sipped coffee, leaned back in folding chairs, and looked up at him with curiosity. Ethan adjusted the mic stand. The room was quiet, respectful. He took a breath. "My name is Ethan Brooks," he said, "and I'm not here to sell you anything. No products, no supplements, no miracle beard serums." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I'm here to talk about what happens when you ignore pain, and why I can't grow a beard anymore." That got their attention. He had told this story before, on podcasts, in articles, at support groups, but standing here, in a barbershop where the smell of aftershave and talc filled the air, where the walls were lined with grooming products and vintage mirrors, it felt heavier, more intimate. He began at the beginning, the first bump, the misdiagnosis, the search terms he typed into Google in the dark at 2 a.m. He told them about the oils, the tea tree solutions, the compresses, the over-the-counter fixes. He told them about the denial, about how he thought shaving would be quitting, about how pride became a kind of infection too. Then he got to the night he let Claire use a needle. The room tensed. He described the initial relief, and how quickly it turned into something far worse. The swelling, the fever, the way the infection spread beneath the surface like fire under dry leaves. The emergency room. The doctor's face when he said, "We need to shave your beard. All of it." He paused then, because that was always the hardest part to say aloud. "There's no shame in caring about your beard," he continued. "I did. It wasn't just facial hair to me, it was part of how I moved through the world, how I projected confidence, how I hid parts of myself I wasn't ready to face." He paced slowly across the small stage, making eye contact with a few of the men in the front row. "But a beard is just that. Hair. It's not armor. It won't protect you from infection. It won't hold back bacteria. It won't save you when your body's trying to warn you something's wrong." He clicked the remote in his hand, and a photo appeared on the screen behind him. His swollen face, post-op, scarred, distorted. A few people winced. This was me. 2 days after surgery. He clicked again. This was me before. A photo of him smiling, full beard, strong jawline, sunlight catching the ridges of his cheek. Another click. And this is me now, a clean-shaven selfie. He looked calm, different, but not broken. He turned back to the audience. "I'm not telling you to shave, I'm telling you to listen. If something hurts for more than a couple of days, if the pain gets worse, if the swelling spreads, don't wait, don't search Reddit, don't ask strangers online, don't let pride get in the way of something treatable." He held the mic with both hands now, the words coming easier. "I didn't lose my beard in a fire. I didn't get attacked. I didn't survive a rare disease. I ignored a common infection until it became a crisis. And I paid the price." He clicked one last time. The screen behind him now showed 2 close-ups, one of the scar along his jaw and one of the bare patch where no hair would ever grow again. "These are my reminders, every day, and I'm not ashamed of them anymore." After the talk, Ethan stepped down from the platform to quiet applause, the kind that wasn't about performance, but understanding. A few men nodded at him as he passed, one even reaching out to shake his hand. He accepted it all with humility, not pride. He made his way to the small booth the organizers had set up for him in the back corner. It wasn't much, just a fold-out table, a poster with his name and story title, and a few handouts summarizing beard folliculitis symptoms and when to see a doctor. He hadn't expected many people to stop by, but they did. One man in his 30s leaned in and whispered, "I've got this bump on my cheek that won't go away. Been there 2 weeks. Think it could be the same thing?" Another, older, lifted his cap and said, "My nephew's obsessed with his beard. He's 17. Think I'll send him your article." A younger guy, barely 21, with an impressive beard already forming, just looked at Ethan and said, "Thanks, man." Seriously, that hit. Ethan stayed until the event ended, talking, answering questions, even helping a few attendees schedule dermatologist appointments on their phones. It felt good, grounded, purposeful. like the pain had meant something. On the walk home that evening, he didn't wear a hat or try to hide his face in his collar. The wind hit the scar tissue across his jaw and cheek, and instead of flinching, he tilted his head slightly into it. Let it sting. Let it breathe. He stopped by a coffee shop on the way, his old favorite. The barista was new. She didn't recognize him, didn't say, "Hey, nice beard," like the one had years ago, but she smiled politely, took his order, and called his name with the same warmth. He took a seat by the window, sipped his drink, and watched the street life go by. A group of friends laughing loudly, a father pushing a stroller, a teenager snapping a selfie in perfect golden hour light, checking his phone immediately for the result. Ethan smiled. He pulled out his phone and opened his photo gallery. There were now 3 albums: before, during, after. He tapped into the after folder. It was still growing. Pictures from events, mirror selfies with light catching the edge of his scar, snapshots of handwritten thank you notes people had sent him. One image showed a message scrawled on the back of a napkin, handed to him after a talk. "You made me care about my health more than my image. Thank you." That one he'd taken a photo of and saved as his phone wallpaper. When he got home, he dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, kicked off his shoes, and made his way to the bathroom. He stood in front of the mirror, the same one that had once made him cry, and stared at his reflection. He saw the man he had become. No beard, no illusions, no fear, just Ethan, a little scarred, a little older, but whole. He reached into the cabinet and pulled out the electric razor. Not because he needed it that day, but because he could hold it now without sadness. He ran it along his jaw, keeping the lines clean, the stubble even. The hum of the machine wasn't a funeral song anymore. It was routine. Maintenance. Care. When he finished, he set it down and smiled at himself. A real smile. Then he whispered, as if telling the mirror a secret he no longer feared, "You're still him. Just newer." And this time, he believed it.